I told my son his father just died. He said, "It's Megan's birthday. Can we talk tomorrow?" That was the moment I realized I didn't just lose a husband, I lost a son too. He never showed up to the funeral, but 3 weeks later he got a letter from my lawyer. He opened it and froze. I did something he will never forget, and I never said a word. Before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe, and please tell me and others, what's one life lesson everyone should hear before it's too late? Share it in the comments below. Thanks. Gerald died right there at the kitchen table, halfway through a joke about how I'd bought the wrong kind of cream again. "If I drop dead from this powdered nonsense," he said, chuckling, tapping his spoon against the side of his mug, "you'll finally know real guilt." Then his hand twitched. The spoon slipped. His eyes widened like he'd forgotten how to breathe. I dropped the butter knife I was using and ran to him, screaming his name, but he was already gone. His body went limp before I could even call. 911, before my knees hit the tile, before I could ask him if it was another one of his goddamn jokes. It wasn't. The operator's voice in my ear was calm while my world split open. I kept whispering his name while they guided me through chest compressions, but I already knew. I knew from the way his head slumped against his shoulder, from how cold his fingers felt when I tried to hold them. When the paramedics arrived, I stepped aside, numb, hearing words like massive, unrecoverable, DNR, and I just nodded. The house felt suddenly too loud and too quiet at the same time. I sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the floor, and after they'd covered him, after they'd told me there was nothing more they could do, I picked up my phone. I called Nathan, my only son. It rang 5 times. When he finally answered, I was shaking, but I managed to say, "Nathan, it's Dad. He just collapsed. He's dead." There was a pause, and then his voice, flat, distracted, said, "Oh, Mom, today's Megan's birthday. Can I call you later?" I didn't even understand the words at first. I thought I'd hallucinated them. But then he added, "She's got this whole brunch planned, and we've got people over." I said nothing. Not a scream, not a sob, just silence. My hand lowered the phone on instinct. I hung up on my own son before I could hear anything else. That would break me even further. The room around me started to hum, like my ears were filling with pressure. I looked over at Gerald's chair, the one he always sat in for breakfast, for late-night crossword puzzles, the one he was still slumped in, and I just sat beside him for what felt like an hour, holding his hand like it would bring him back. At some point, the coroner came. They asked if I wanted a moment. I didn't. What was the point? The moment I needed was gone. I went upstairs, locked the door, and lay down on our bed without changing the sheets. Gerald's phone was on the nightstand. I picked it up, hoping there'd be something. And there was. A missed call log from last night, 10:42 p.m. 1 missed call to Nathan, no voicemail, no answer. He tried. Gerald tried to talk to him last night. Maybe he knew something was wrong. Maybe he felt it, and our son ignored it. I held the phone to my chest and felt the weight of everything we'd built. 42 years of marriage, a house full of memories, a man who worked every damn day to make sure his family never went without. And the silence from Nathan rang louder than any eulogy ever could. The day of Gerald's funeral felt like stepping into a parallel universe where I could see everyone's lips moving, but hear nothing except the screaming silence of Nathan's absence. I stood by the casket, gripping the edges of the podium, trying to keep my balance, while people I hadn't seen in years came up and whispered things like, "He was such a good man," and "We're so sorry." And all I could think about was how my son, my only child, was not there, not in the pews, not standing beside me, not even in the damn parking lot. When I called the night before to confirm the funeral time, Megan answered and told me Nathan was still thinking about it because they had already booked a weekend getaway and cancellation fees are steep this close to the date. I remember staring at the phone, blinking as she rambled about how Megan's birthday was important too and that she was trying to keep things light for the sake of her own mental health. I didn't even respond. I just hung up. I didn't want to beg for attendance at a funeral, especially not for Gerald's. Not when he was the one who stayed up all night with a colicky Nathan, who spent weekends building Lego cities and teaching him how to balance a checkbook by age 12. And not when Gerald called Nathan the night before he died and never got a call back. People noticed. Of course they did. The whispers started before the service even began. Where's Nathan? Did he miss his flight? Is Megan okay? Like they were the ones we should be worried about. Even Gerald's college friend Frank leaned over and said, I thought your boy would be front and center today. And I just nodded like it wasn't breaking me in half. But the moment that really shattered me came after the service when one of Gerald's co-workers, Brian, approached me by the coffee urn in the fellowship hall and said, I don't mean to pry, but Gerald mentioned something odd in passing last month about helping Nathan out financially, seemed stressed about it. That stopped me cold, because Gerald never told me anything like that. We had no secrets, or so I thought. I didn't ask Brian to elaborate. I just smiled, thanked him for coming, and excused myself to the restroom where I sat on the toilet seat lid and stared at the floor until someone knocked, asking if everything was okay. Everything was not okay. My son missed his father's funeral for a brunch and a weekend getaway, and now I was hearing hints of financial stress and secrecy. When I got home that night, the silence in the house was unbearable. I poured myself a glass of wine, stared at Gerald's armchair, and tried not to think about how cold and alone I felt. Then I opened my phone and saw a photo Megan had posted on Instagram, her in a bright pink dress, holding a mimosa, captioned, Best birthday ever, love my hubby. It had been posted during the funeral, during the eulogy. I stared at the screen until the image blurred and my hands started to shake. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in our bed, reaching instinctively for the weight of Gerald's hand beside me, and came up empty. At around 3 a.m., I got up, opened Gerald's desk drawer, and started pulling out paperwork, bank statements, insurance records, old receipts, anything that might explain what Brian had said. Because now it wasn't just grief. Now there was something else, something colder, a sense that maybe I didn't know the full story of my own family, and the one person who could have answered everything, Gerald, was gone. The next morning I woke up with a mission, not out of curiosity, but out of something sharper, something closer to rage disguised as grief, and I went straight to Gerald's filing cabinet, the one he kept locked, but always said I had the spare key for, which I did, taped to the back of our wedding photo in the closet, like some quaint little gesture of trust that now felt more like a test. I opened the drawer and started going through folders, thick with years of tax returns, retirement plans, bank statements organized by month and year like a man who never expected to die mid-sentence. It didn't take long to find it, a slim, blue folder labeled Nathan Transfers. I sat down, heart pounding, and flipped through a timeline of quiet betrayal. Regular wire transfers from Gerald's account to Nathan's, $2,000 here, $3,500 there, and one that made my hands go cold, $12,000 labeled Urgent, Megan Medical. I stared at the numbers like they might change if I blinked hard enough. There were 15 transfers in the past 18 months. I had no idea. Gerald never told me. We didn't keep secrets. We'd agreed on that the day we merged bank accounts and picked out a crib together. I kept reading, searching for a clue, something to make it make sense. That's when I found it, a letter folded and tucked between the last two statements. It was handwritten on yellow legal pad paper, the kind Gerald always kept on his desk, and it wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Nathan. Nathan. It read, This is the second time you've told your mother one thing and done another. I've kept quiet because I wanted to believe you were being honest, but if you lie about Megan's expenses again, or if I find out you've used this money for anything other than what you said, I'll have no choice but to cut you off completely. I love you, but I won't let you take advantage of your mother's trust. It wasn't signed, but I knew Gerald's handwriting like I knew the creases of his palm. He never sent it. It was dated 2 weeks before he died. I sat there staring at it, my hand trembling, the edges of the paper crinkling in my grip. My mind kept returning to the way Nathan's voice sounded over the phone after I told him his father died. Calm, inconvenienced, like I was asking him to cancel a dentist appointment. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't cry. I just sat there, trapped in this horrible realization that the man I loved had spent the last months of his life quietly battling our son's lies while shielding me from the fallout. And now Nathan, who couldn't be bothered to show up to the funeral, had accepted tens of thousands of dollars while pretending nothing was wrong. I put the folder back in the drawer, locked it, and tucked the key back behind the photo where it belonged, not out of respect, but because I needed time to think. Not just about the money or the lies, but about what it all meant, about what kind of man my son had become, and whether I had the strength to do what Gerald clearly hadn't been able to finish. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same place. Gerald had died 5 days ago, and stared at the same coffee mug he'd held, still unwashed in the sink. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing. I was done pretending everything was fine. He showed up unannounced on a Wednesday, 5 days after the funeral, as if that somehow made it okay, as if grief had an expiration date and his delayed appearance could still count for something. But when I opened the door and saw Nathan standing, there with his hands in his jacket pockets and that hollow, uncomfortable look in his eyes, I didn't feel relief. I felt calculation, like he'd come not out of sorrow, but obligation, or worse, damage control. Behind him was Megan, sitting in their car, idling in the driveway like she was ready to drive off the second it got uncomfortable, which told me everything before he even opened his mouth. "Mom," he said, and I stepped aside without a word, leading him into the living room where Gerald's chair still sat untouched, a silent monument to everything Nathan had ignored. I offered him coffee out of habit, but he declined, fidgeting on the edge of the couch like he was waiting for a commercial break so he could escape. And when he finally spoke, it was with a strained sort of politeness. "Megan thinks I should have come sooner, and she's probably right." And I wanted to laugh, because of course she was the one who told him. Of course it took her permission, not love or guilt or a conscience, just her saying, "Go fix it," like it was a PR issue. I nodded slowly and sat across from him, my phone already recording from the pocket of my cardigan, because I didn't trust myself to remember every lie, every deflection. And I didn't trust him not to gaslight me about this moment later, especially not after what I'd found in Gerald's files. "Did you know your father tried to call you the night before he died?" I asked, watching his face for the flinch, and it came, a slight twitch in his jaw, followed by a defensive shrug. I had my phone on silent. We were out for dinner. Megan planned this surprise thing, and he caught himself mid-sentence, like he realized how ridiculous it sounded. And I just let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable enough that he started filling it with more half-formed excuses. I meant to call him back, I did, but I didn't know it was serious. He never said anything about being sick. You didn't either. And I kept my expression neutral because I didn't want him to see how much that line hurt, how quickly. He'd tried to shift the blame onto me, like it was my fault he didn't show up, like Gerald's death was a scheduling error we all shared responsibility for. "He wasn't sick, Nathan. He had a heart attack at the breakfast table. 5 minutes after joking about the coffee creamer," I said flatly. And he looked away, rubbing his forehead like this conversation was a burden, like I was making things worse by refusing to smooth it over. Then I leaned forward and said it plainly. "I found the transfers." And his whole body stiffened like I'd dropped a match onto gasoline. "What transfers?" he said too quickly, too loudly, and I didn't bother to ease him into it. "The ones from Dad's account to yours, Megan's medical bills, your vacation, the rent shortfall. Don't lie to me, Nathan, not now." And he had the audacity to look offended. "Those were loans, Mom. We were going through a rough patch," Dad offered. And that's when I handed him the folded yellow letter, the one Gerald wrote but never sent, the one where he told Nathan that if he lied again, the money would stop. He read it in silence, then folded it back up like it wasn't the most damning piece of evidence of who he'd become, and said, "He didn't mean that." And I realized I wasn't talking to my son anymore, not the boy who used to fall asleep on Gerald's chest during Sunday football, not the teenager who helped build his father's shed in the backyard, but a man who had learned how to rationalize his own betrayal, and I felt nothing but cold, sharp clarity. This wasn't someone who made a mistake. This was someone who had made a choice, over and over, to prioritize his own comfort over our family, and now he was here because Megan had told him to salvage what was left. I stood up, walked to the door, and said, "I'll let you know if I need anything from you." And he looked like he wanted to say something, but Megan honked from the driveway, and he just nodded, walking out without a hug, without a single question about how I was holding up, and I watched him get in the car, watched Megan glance at the house with that smirk she probably didn't even realize she wore when she thought she'd won something, and I thought, you have no idea what's coming. The morning after Nathan's visit, I woke up with a calmness that almost scared me, the kind that comes not from peace, but from decision. And I didn't even make coffee before calling Alan Klein, our longtime attorney, the man who handled Gerald's business filings for decades and sent us birthday cards without fail. When I told him I needed to revise my will immediately, he didn't ask questions, just scheduled me for the next day, and I gathered everything: bank statements, the folder of Nathan's transfers, Gerald's unsent letter, and the audio file of Nathan's pathetic half-confession from the day before. Then added one final item, a handwritten letter to Ava, our granddaughter, to be opened on her 18th birthday. Because whatever else happened in this family, that little girl deserved to know the truth, not the version her mother would spin or the silence Nathan would try to pass off as dignity. When I walked into Alan's office, he took one look at my face and said, "I assume this is about more than estate planning." And I nodded, handed him the documents, and said, "Everything goes into a trust, every account, every asset. The house, the annuity, Gerald's stocks, but not for Nathan, not for Megan, not a cent." And he didn't blink, just opened a legal pad and started writing. We structured it so that Ava would inherit everything, but not until she turned 25, with early access only for educational expenses and housing. No luxury cars, no guilt-driven teenage bribes. And I asked Alan to include a clause that, if Nathan or Megan ever attempted to challenge the will, Ava would gain full control immediately and they'd forfeit all rights, including visitation during the trust's active years, which I knew sounded harsh, but when a parent chooses brunch over a funeral and a spouse chooses manipulation over mourning, you stop worrying about diplomacy and start protecting the only piece of your husband still left on earth. Alan reviewed everything twice, added a section for the letter I'd written, sealed in a manila envelope labeled "For Ava" on her 18th birthday, and included a transcript of Nathan's visit, confirming the deception, the financial abuse, and the emotional abandonment. And then he looked at me and said, "This is solid, Cora. No loopholes, no weak points, but it's going to hit him hard." And I said, "That's the point, Alan. It's supposed to." The final draft was notarized and filed within an hour, and I walked out feeling not like I'd won, but like I'd reclaimed something, a boundary, a line in the sand Gerald had never quite been able to draw. And it wasn't revenge, it was reality. If my son wanted to treat his parents like ATM machines with no expiration date, then he'd find out just how long that machine had been watching, documenting, waiting for the exact moment to cut the cord. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of wine and reread the letter I wrote to Ava. 6 pages of truth, not bitterness, explaining who her grandfather really was, what he'd done for her father, and how that kindness had been turned into leverage and lies. I told her the money she would one day receive wasn't a gift. It was a responsibility, a reminder to choose love over convenience, loyalty over appearances, and courage over compliance, because she was the only one left in our family who still had a chance to do it right. When I sealed that envelope, I felt like I'd closed a chapter, not of grief, but of silence, the kind that creeps in when people you love betray you slowly enough that you forget it's betrayal at all, until one day you're standing at a funeral, with no one beside you. And now, finally, I had made sure that silence would not be passed down. The letter landed in Nathan's mailbox 4 days after I left Alan's office, sent by certified mail with a delivery confirmation slip that hit my inbox at 11:13 a.m. And I imagined him standing in his kitchen, flipping through envelopes like it was any other Wednesday, until he saw the law firm's logo stamped in the corner. And I knew the moment he opened it because he didn't call, didn't text, didn't email. Not that day, not the next, but Megan did, and not with words, just with a string of rapid-fire texts that ranged from passive-aggressive, "Wow, classy, Cora," to openly hostile, "You're unbelievable. Do you even care about Ava?" And I didn't reply because that silence was the most honest thing I could give them. When I finally picked up the phone on the third day, it was Nathan calling from a blocked number, his voice low, uncertain, almost soft, like he thought maybe if he used the tone he used when he was 6 and scared to admit he'd broken something, I'd melt into the mom he remembered from before this all turned to ash. He started with, "Mom, I just got the letter," like I didn't already know, like the last 72 hours hadn't been thick with the weight of his reaction. And I said, "Nothing, just let the silence speak." And when he finally said, "Is this real?" I answered, "You tell me," because there was nothing left to explain, and the pause that followed felt like the longest 10 seconds of my life before he finally said, "I didn't know Dad felt that way." And I snapped, not screamed, not raged, just snapped into ice. "You didn't know because you never asked, Nathan. You were too busy pretending we were optional." And that was when Megan picked up on the other line, her voice sharp, demanding, "You can't actually disinherit your own son. That's insane." And I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because of how predictable she was. How quickly the mask dropped when the money dried up, and I said, "I didn't disinherit him. I protected Ava." And Megan scoffed, "From us?" Like she couldn't even conceive of herself as a threat, and I answered, "From this moment, this conversation, this entitlement." And before she could spit out whatever venom she had next, I hung up, because that was the boundary. Now, you don't get to choose neglect and then demand access. You don't get to opt out of grief and then claim inheritance. You don't get to erase the funeral and then rewrite the will. I sat at the kitchen table afterward, same spot where Gerald's heart gave out, staring at the quiet that followed, and for the first time since the service, I felt something close to stillness, not happiness, not closure, but control, like I had finally done the thing Gerald couldn't bring himself to do before it was too late. Later that night, I got one more text from Nathan. It just said, "I don't know how we come back from this." And I didn't reply, because the answer wasn't mine to give anymore. It was Ava's. And one day, when she was old enough to understand everything, she would decide who earned a place in her future, and that was the legacy I was leaving behind. They showed up on a Sunday afternoon without warning. Megan stepping out of the car in heels too high for a driveway confrontation, and Nathan trailing behind her like he wasn't sure whether he was there to support her or contain her. And the second I opened the front door, she started in, not with a greeting, not with a question, but with an accusation. "You're manipulating this family through legal threats," her voice sharp and practiced, like she'd rehearsed it in the mirror. And I stood in the doorway without moving, not inviting them in, not budging an inch, just letting the weight of her words hit the silence between us. And then she added, "You're punishing us for setting boundaries." And that was when I saw it. The smug tilt of her head, the belief that somehow she still held the moral high ground, even after skipping Gerald's funeral, even after siphoning money through Nathan, even after trying to play victim in a story she wrote with her own hands. I said nothing, just stepped aside enough for them to come in, mostly because I knew Ava was upstairs in the hallway, half listening like all kids do, and something in me needed her to witness this, not to hurt her, but to protect her, to give her truth as armor. Megan strutted into the living room, her perfume heavy, her words heavier, and Nathan sat down quietly, eyes on the floor, while she took the lead like she always did. "We talked to a lawyer," she said, arms crossed. "And if this will isn't revised, we may have grounds to question your capacity." And that's when I finally spoke, calm and low. "Are you threatening to declare me mentally unfit?" And Megan shrugged. "I'm just saying it's not unheard of. Grief does strange things to people." And I saw Nathan flinch at that, whether from guilt or shame I couldn't tell. And then I heard the faint creak of the hallway floor upstairs. Ava shifting her weight, listening, and I knew every word being spoken was being absorbed by the only person in this family who still had a chance to see clearly. I turned to Nathan and asked, "Do you agree with her?" And he didn't answer, just swallowed and looked away. And that silence was louder than anything Megan had said, because it confirmed what I needed to know. He wouldn't stop her. He wouldn't stand up to her. He wouldn't defend his mother or his father's memory, not when it meant risking conflict in his own home. Megan took that silence as fuel, stepped closer and said, "You're tearing this family apart over money." And I laughed, Not loud, not mocking, just a single dry laugh, the kind you let out when something's so absurd it crosses into tragedy. And I said, "I'm tearing it apart? Gerald died alone. His own son didn't show up. And you're worried about the inheritance?" And that was when I saw Ava step into the hallway, halfway down the stairs, eyes wide but steady, and Megan turned, startled. But Ava didn't say a word, just looked at her father, then me, then walked slowly back upstairs. And the weight of that silent moment hung in the room like a storm cloud waiting to break. Megan noticed it too, her expression faltering for the first time, and she said, "She doesn't understand." And I replied, "She understands more than you think." And then I opened the front door, held it wide, and said, "We're done." "Here?" And Nathan stood without protest, walked out ahead of Megan, and she hesitated for 1 second, like she might say something else. But instead she followed, heels clacking against the tile, and I shut the door behind them before her last step hit the porch. It was 3 weeks after that confrontation when I found it, a small black flash drive inside an envelope tucked into my mailbox. No note, no label, just my name written in Ava's careful 12-year-old handwriting. And my heart dropped because I knew instantly it wasn't something playful or innocent. This wasn't a drawing or a digital birthday card. This was something serious, something secret. And when I plugged it into my laptop, I sat in silence as folders opened themselves to me like tiny windows into a world I hadn't been allowed to see. Each one named by date, each filled with files. That made my stomach twist. Recordings of phone calls, screenshots of text messages, even a few videos filmed from behind her bedroom door, shaky but clear enough to catch every word Megan and Nathan had thought were safely tucked behind closed conversations. In one recording, Megan was yelling, her voice sharp and fast. "She's manipulating everyone with that will, and if Ava sides with her, I swear to God, Nathan, we'll pull her out of that school and homeschool her until she gets her head on straight." And in another, Nathan's voice was quieter, but somehow worse. "Just let Mom run her game. It's not like we were counting on the money right now anyway, and if Ava plays nice, she can still help us later." And I sat there, frozen, listening to my own son talk about my estate like it was a strategy board, like I was some dying pawn instead of his living, breathing mother. But the worst part came in a video labeled Kitchen Night, where Megan, standing by the sink, whispered into her phone, "If we push just a little harder, she'll crack. We'll say she's confused, maybe get the lawyer to question her. State of mind." And then boom, the trust gets flagged. And I could hear Ava's breath catch just as the video cut off. And I don't know what broke me more, Megan's audacity or the fact that my granddaughter had been protecting me while I was trying to protect her. Buried at the bottom of the folders was a text document, just a few lines long, but it read like a gut punch. "Grandma, I didn't know who else to tell. I hear things when they think I'm asleep. I know they're lying. I believe you. I'm saving this in case you ever need help." I stared at those words for a long time, longer than anything I'd read since Gerald's letter. And I knew in that moment that the legacy I thought I was leaving wasn't just about money or trust clauses or revenge. It was about her, about Ava standing alone in a house where truth was treated like poison, recording evidence to protect the only adult in her life who hadn't failed her yet. I backed up the drive twice, one copy for Alan, one locked in my safe, and I wrote a new letter to Ava, sealed and dated, to be opened if anything ever happened to me before she turned 18, because I needed her to know that not only did I believe her, I trusted her, and that if she ever needed to stand in front of a judge, a school counselor, or anyone else who questioned her sanity, she'd have proof that she saw it all and never looked away. That night, I didn't cry, I didn't rage, I just sat in Gerald's chair, holding that tiny flash drive in my palm like it was a grenade and a gift all at once. And I made a vow, not just to protect Ava's inheritance, but to protect her voice, because in this family, she was the first one brave enough to use it. The mediation took place in a neutral office downtown, a beige room with polite furniture and bottled water on a glass table, the kind of place designed to feel non-threatening while everyone inside prepares to go to war. And when Nathan and Megan walked in, Megan dressed like she was going to a courtroom drama audition, and Nathan looking 10 years older than he had a month ago. I didn't greet them, didn't offer a smile, just sat with Alan at my side, the folder containing Ava's flash drive, the bank transfers, Gerald's unsent letter, and the transcript of Nathan's recorded visit stacked neatly in front of me like a quiet threat wrapped in paper. The mediator introduced herself and began with a warm, neutral tone, asking why we were here, and Megan immediately launched into her narrative, painting me as grief-stricken and vengeful, suggesting my decisions were driven by emotional instability and potential cognitive decline, and I watched her rehearse her victimhood like a script she'd memorized. While Nathan sat beside her, silent, face drawn, eyes darting away every time I looked at him, and when it was my turn, I didn't raise my voice, didn't tremble. I just passed the folder across the table and said, "This is why." And I watched the mediator flip through page after page of documentation, dates, transactions, handwritten notes, the audio file list, and finally, Ava's flash drive with a simple printed label, evidence. And I knew the moment the room shifted, the exact second the weight of truth broke the illusion Megan had been spinning, because the mediator paused, looked up, and asked Megan directly, "Were you aware that your daughter recorded statements about attempting to alter a legal trust through manipulation?" And Megan's face drained of color as she sputtered, "She's 12. She doesn't understand context." But it was too late. The words were out, the recordings existed, and the facade crumbled fast. The mediator turned to Nathan and asked if he'd like to speak, and he said nothing, just rubbed his hands together like he was trying to erase fingerprints from his own guilt. And I said, "She tried to warn you." And that's when Megan exploded. Not with words of defense, but fury, pure unfiltered rage, slamming her hand on the table and yelling, "This is all because you couldn't handle your husband dying. Now you're trying to punish us because you're lonely." And the mediator calmly asked her to step outside for a moment to collect herself, and Megan stormed out, heels echoing in the hallway, leaving Nathan behind. And for the first time since Gerald's funeral, Nathan finally spoke directly to me, his voice small, tired. I didn't know it had gotten that bad. And I said, "You didn't want to know." And he nodded slowly, staring at the floor. "I just wanted peace." And I told him, "You don't get peace from silence, you get it from standing up when it matters." And when the mediator returned, she informed us that there was no basis to challenge the trust, that it was legally sound, morally justified, and based on overwhelming documentation, and that Ava's statements held weight as evidence of undue pressure within the household. Megan didn't come back in, not even to hear the outcome, and Nathan left shortly after, quietly, without a handshake, without a look back, and I stayed behind for a moment, gathering my things, and felt the strangest sensation wash over me. Not triumph, not relief, but a kind of settled sorrow. The kind that comes when you realize the battle's over, not because you won, but because the truth finally made it impossible for anyone to keep pretending otherwise. Ava turned 18 last Friday, and the day came not with balloons or cake, but with a quiet knock on my door just after noon, her eyes wide but steady as she stepped inside and handed me the letter I'd written her 5 years ago, unopened, still sealed, and said, "I wanted to read it with you," and I didn't say anything, just nodded and watched as she carefully opened the envelope like it might break apart in her hands, unfolding the 6 pages I had poured my soul into back when everything felt like it was collapsing. And she read silently for several minutes, her face shifting from focus to tears, pausing only once to ask, "Is all of this still true?" And I said, "Every word." And she hugged me tighter than she ever had, whispering, "Thank you for telling me the truth when no one else would." And I felt every ounce of pain and purpose inside that hug. After we sat down in Gerald's old chair together, she pulled out her phone and showed me a short video. Her, standing in front of a judge at a legal name change hearing, saying clearly, "I'd like to change my middle name to Coraline, after my grandmother." And I couldn't stop the tears then, couldn't hold back the way my chest cracked open at the sound of her reclaiming her identity, choosing a part of this family that didn't hurt her, didn't lie to her, didn't treat her like leverage. Later that afternoon, we went to her graduation ceremony, and as she crossed the stage and they called out her full new name, Ava Coraline Whitfield, She looked right at me and smiled. And I saw in her face not just pride, but clarity. The kind Gerald used to wear when he made hard decisions that no one else understood until it was too late. Nathan was there too, sitting alone in the back row, his eyes red, his suit wrinkled, clapping out of obligation more than joy, and he didn't approach me, didn't approach Ava either. Not because he wasn't allowed, but because I think he finally understood what it meant to be cut off in ways deeper than a bank account. After the ceremony, Ava ran to me first, hugged me again, and whispered, she chose me to live with next semester. Her roommate backed out. And I laughed through tears, knowing I'd get another year of her stories, her music in the background, her toothbrush in my bathroom like a quiet victory against everything Megan tried to script. We never mentioned Megan that day, not once, because by then she had faded into the background like a subplot that had lost its relevance, her silence more telling than any apology she never gave. And when I tucked Ava in that night, in her old childhood room, I left the door cracked open just like I used to, and she said, you gave me a life I didn't even know I needed. And I kissed her forehead and said, you chose it. Sweetheart, I just cleared the path. And as I walked down the hallway back to my own room, past Gerald's photo on the wall, I touched the frame and said softly, she's going to be okay, love. We're going to be okay. And for the first time in years, I actually believed it.